how do you hire people to help out with your business, right? Who do you hire? Where do you find them? What do you hire them to do? There's so many things going on right now in your world. You've been doing everything for so long, and now it's finally time to, well, it's finally time to get a little bit of help. But what do you offset first? It's not a straightforward question. And that's why I think that you'll really enjoy and benefit from this hot seat with Alex from my mentorship. He's ready to hire somebody to help out with his business. And we walk through figuring out what to hire that person for. This is something I don't see spoken about enough. And so I hope that you enjoy it and I hope that it helps. And at the end, I'll be back to recommend another episode for you to listen to. Enjoy. Alex, you were the only one doing this today on the hot seat, and then we're going to get into the topics. So, real quick, who you are, who you serve, and then what we're talking about today, and then we'll dive into it.
Yeah, so first off, I just want to say thank you for, breaking down my business. It really means a lot. A little bit about myself. I'm 25 years old. I'm from Toronto, Canada. Just finished a master's in physiotherapy. I started my online coaching business in 2019, and it was kind of like a side thing where I just have a couple clients here and there. And then it wasn't until 2021, 2022 when I started to pick things up a little bit more. Had maybe a roster of about 10 clients before joining OTM, making roughly like 2-3K a month. No real structure to it, but it was like still kind of steady. Joined OTM, did the first part, and was able to basically scale to hitting like 11. The last 4 months was between 11 and 14K. So my next step right now, I wanted to get to 15, 20K. That was kind of like the plan that I mapped out with Jason when I started doing Legacy.
Okay.
Right now, I feel like I'm running into issues with just like delegating tasks and doing everything on my own. Because I'm still doing everything on my own. I have 32 clients right now. I'm going to increase my prices this month, but again, like that's something also I've been kind of apprehensive about too, because I feel like I get like this, what is it, imposter syndrome? I get imposter syndrome with like charging the amount that I charge, but like with that being said, I still like sold 12 clients on the last price, my current price right now.
Right. Okay, thank you for sharing all of that. It sounds kind of similar to where Ashley's at, so this would be good. So we could talk about virtual assistant a little bit, but I think with you, actually, it's probably assistant coach, not virtual assistant. So we'll talk about that as well. I'm just going to mute you. I got a little bit of static coming in, so just unmute yourself when you're chatting again. So, yeah, you're right. I mean, it might be time to increase your prices, but like that will only get you so far regardless. You know what I'm saying? So I don't think that that's the absolute solution. It might get you up a little bit more, but then you'll get to that point, and let's say even if you increase your price and then you got up to 50K, it's going to be like, hey, what do I do next? So yes, it is often very important to increase prices, but it's not going to get you to that next level, if that makes sense. It sounds to me, Alex, like you got to bring on an assistant coach, and oftentimes people wait far too long to do that, because obviously it cuts into profits, but also they just like don't really know how, when what they've been doing is what they've been doing, and they're really good at what they do, and you have all of this amazing education, and you would be hard pressed to find somebody who is as good as you. And this goes into the conversation, Ashley, with you as well, with virtual assistant. You kind of have to accept when you hire on people that, they're probably going to do 70 to 80% as good of a job as you're going to do. And that's just a matter of scaling a business. And you ultimately want them to get up to 100%, or you want to get to the point, the magical point where your ego gets a kick in the nuts, where you're like, well, actually, they do a better job than I can do. But that may or may not happen. Where I find a lot of people go wrong when they're hiring non-assistant coaches, particularly for online coaching, is they're hiring, they often hire too much for the absolute skill and not for the intangible qualities of what makes a great coach. At the end of the day, it's going to be your knowledge. It's going to be your programming. The best assistant coaches, the best people to scale your business aren't necessarily the best practitioners. They're not necessarily the most educated in terms of like science, in terms of the programming aspect of it, because that's going to come from you at the top. And then for a while, you're going to be the one kind of adjusting that. Where they really can come in is they can connect with the people probably better than you because they'll have more time and energy. And they might also have a similar background. We'll talk about that in a second. And also, they just might have more of the soft skills. Like one of my favorite stories is Herb Kelleher, who was the CEO of Southwest Airlines for many, many years, was asked in an interview, and they asked him, the interviewer said, everybody who works for your airline is so smiley. Like, what do you do to train people? Like, how do you get people to be so smiley? And he just kind of stopped for a second and he looked at them and he's just like, we just hire smiley people. And it seems so obvious. But if you know what natural attribute you really need to have the type of personality, you will find that finding that person is actually relatively easy. Like interviewing is hard, but if you're like, no, I just need somebody who's just like really kind and generous and empathetic and answers me like that, because that's important for particularly an assistant coach, like fast response times and stuff. Well, then that's what you look for, because you know that you can kind of train the rest. Can you think of anybody, Alex, that has been through your program? I don't care if they have a fitness background or not. Can you think of anybody that's been through your program, maybe even is still in your program, that might make a good coach?
Yeah, there's a couple guys who kind of excelled with like the programming. The only issue would be like just time difference, because the one person that comes to mind, he's like based in Australia, so
Okay.
that would be a really difficult to like manage with everyone in like, the States in Canada. I was talking to my success coach, and he was mentioning looking at onboarding a potential setter first, not a assistant coach, because I feel like a lot of the clients in my programming, they have like a high affinity to just work with me. So I don't know how they would feel about me bringing someone else on. And that's where like I get kind of nervous about thinking about things like that.
Um, I'll fight you on that. This mentorship has my name on it. How many times have you spoken to me until now?
I think it's like the first real conversation.
So, I think that's the type of thing that probably worries us. And I'm absolutely the front of it. And almost everybody who joins through something that I've done, right? There's interviews with Melissa and things that are phenomenal. And that's starting to happen more and more and more. But I think a lot of that fear is in our head. I mean, even if people say that, I think if they're looked after and treated well in a program, you'll find that that's not actually a fear. In terms of the setter itself, I mean, it might be the case. You tell me whether you think, I mean, so if you bring on a setter, they're going to have a lot more people coming through the woodwork with you, which means that you're probably going to do a lot more of the sales calls, or maybe the setter could do some of the sales calls. And maybe you bring on a salesperson and then you're training. So let's say you have 50 clients. Great. You're making a lot of money. Is that something that you can handle with the way that you're managing your systems right now?
So if I have someone just taking care of doing all the DMs and setting appointments and even maybe helping with the content, then yeah, I can just focus on the coaching. I think that's what everyone ultimately wants to do, because we're in coach. So it's just like, where am I going to delegate some of the tasks to free up some of my mental capacity? Because at the end of the day, it's not like they're long, tedious tasks that we have to do, but just like having to switch between tasks is really exhausting, from like making content to like sending out DMs every day, to setting appointments, to having your check-in calls, to reminding people to do your Facebook like accountability, to checking up on people who haven't replied to messages. It's really overwhelming. And like, I'd rather just focus on one thing. I try to group it where like in the beginning of the week I'll focus on posting content, my check-in calls, and later in the week I try to put more enrollment calls and any loose ends that hasn't been tied in the week. So I try to add like a system so I don't have to shift between tasks too often. But then again, it's just me doing everything. So by the time I get to the weekend, I feel absolutely fried and I don't want to do anything.
Yeah,
And
and that's not a good, it's not a good feeling. I mean, I feel you on that. And I agree. The idea of task switching is far more damaging than the actual time for the task itself. So do you resonate with that then? It sounds like the coaching is not an issue and not anything that you're concerned about, which is totally cool. I appreciate you pushing back on that. Do you think it's the content? Do you think it's the setting and the calls? Where, if I were to say you got to pick one thing right now, because you're not going to be able to find one person who does the setting and the calls and the follow-up and the content. What
I'd
are
say,
you, what do you think?
I'd say like if I look at the entire bottleneck, if I can get someone to just set the appointments and all I have to worry about is just doing calls and posting content and then
Okay.
managing clients, that would take a big load off my shoulders, right? But I mean, it could be something else, like another task. Because just like getting people to reply, like you're sending out so many DMs and only so many people are replying to you, and so many people are hopping on call or booking calls with you. And out of that, some people don't even hop on the call with you. So it's like
Yeah.
just that whole process from Monday to like when I book them on Wednesday to Friday, you do all that work and you maybe get maybe max 6 calls if you're like having a good week for myself.
Yep.
And like it's still a lot of calls. Like you're still spending at least 6 hours on just doing enrollments,
Okay.
right? Or like all the hours in the DMs, posting the content, and making sure you're DMing people at the right time. Because usually when you like post a piece of content, engagement is good around like an hour or two after. So you send out DMs then, people are more likely to respond to you. It's like a timing thing that I can't really, you know.
So I mean, that sounds like the next step then. And you're already working on that with your success coach. So is that something that you guys have a plan in place?
Yeah, so I'm supposed to work on the legacy module for hiring, for onboarding. So that's something
Okay.
I'm working on now. Um, yeah, that's like the next big
I mean,
step.
I agree then. I agree then. It sounds like you know exactly what you need. Get somebody to get in there and work the follow up and do the calls. And as they get good, what they'll be able to do is they'll be able to work and book new calls with you as well. Like what we're doing in my Instagram, where we basically have like a giveaway once a week for something different. And usually it's a podcast episode. Like it's not even anything net new that we create. It's a podcast episode, or you could even choose like an old piece of content that was popular and just create a tease and a call to action and say, DM me if you want the link to it. And you can send them to a link to a piece of content, to a piece of Instagram content that went live 2 months ago. And then they can follow up with, hey, I'm curious, what are you hoping to achieve this? Hey, are you currently working with a coach, or some sort of question that makes sense, depending on it. Like, oh, do you have any knee pain? And whatever the piece of content is about, whatever they put their hand up and said they were interested in. And the nice thing about that is once this DM setter is set up, yeah, right now it's only an hour or so after you post a piece of content, maybe. But once they're going and once you're more confident with them in there, they can actually create a lot more that you don't have the capacity to even think about doing right now, in terms of just creating like a little thing in the stories or something like that. Because what I do in the stories, where I'm asking people to respond, gets way more response than anything I do anywhere else. Way more than a post, way more than anything else. And it's just a one slide call to action. DM me if you want this thing. And it fills our entire sales team. Like we're at the point now where we can't book calls because we have too many calls that are booked from that one method. And it's nothing to do on the feed. So yeah, man, I like it. I like that you centered in on that. And I like that you were very specific in saying, here's the one thing we got to do right now. And you're already working on it. So I won't interrupt that process because the success coach is way better than I am at helping you find that person and onboard that person. But what I will say is, once you find that person and onboard that person, absolutely integrate them into what you're already doing. But then look for ways that you can leverage them more once you're more confident in them having the conversations in there. And that'll take a little bit of time because they're going to be speaking for you, from your account. Like it'll take some time to get comfortable with that and to make sure that they're speaking the way that you feel comfortable them speaking.
Totally agree. Yeah. Okay. One more question.
Yeah, go for it.
So with increasing like the prices, so this is something that John's been like kind of pushing me to do in the last for like a little while now, and I think I'm gonna do it for this next launch that I'm doing next week. But I always have this dilemma. I'm like, if I'm gonna increase my prices, do I have to like be better as a coach? Like, do I have to develop my skills? Like, do I have to read more? Do I have to do something different to provide a better service? And that's where I'm always like caught. But I'm like, I don't have time to like do all these things. Like, I'm already busy. How am I gonna add just like developing my skills into that? But I know it's something I still want to do.
Yeah. When was the last time outside of okay, let me take a step back. There are two types of consumers that exist. This is a political scientist named Herbert Simon who came out with this philosophy, but it's pretty well accepted now. There's two types of consumers that exist. There's what's called satisficers and maximizers. And the vast majority of consumers for everything are satisficers. Basically, they buy stuff to make problems go away. They don't really read into what's good or what's bad. They're largely ignorant towards what makes something good or bad in that discipline anyway, because there's just too much to know. And all of us are satisficers. There's a rare occasion where you meet people who are maximizers and everything. I know two people like that. They're both pretty far along the autism spectrum, and that's pretty common for people who just like the type of person who will read every single review for every single thing that they ever buy. And they try to find the best specs and whatever it is. It's like, you can think through your life and think about how many people are like that. And like, it's maybe, one or two. The vast majority of us are satisficers in just about everything we buy. But the, the exception to that is we're not satisficers in everything. We do maximize in one or two things, and we often maximize in the discipline that we work in, which is a mindfuck, because it makes it very difficult for us to see the forest from the trees, because we're placing ourselves and our own biases and our own stories about what we do through a maximizer lens. Whereas the reality of it is, almost every single person who buys from us is seeing it as an outsider from a satisficer lens. So that's the preface to all of this. When was the last time you ever looked up and actually made a decision that was a legitimately educated decision based off of the things that that person who works in that industry deems important? I don't think I ever have. Really. I don't think I ever have. I think about how did I choose my financial advisor? This guy is a very important coach in my life. We pay him $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year in fees alone. He manages my family's entire wealth. Pretty important. You know how I found him? He sits on the board of the synagogue that my dad used to go to. I haven't been to synagogue in 30 years, probably 25 years. But my dad trusted him because he sat on the board of the synagogue. I don't know whether he has any credentials. I don't know whether he does any continuing education. I don't know what credentials a financial advisor should even have. I have no clue. Another extreme example. Allison had cancer 2 years ago. She's fine. For anybody who doesn't know the story, like, she's good. I don't want to scare anybody, but she had cancer 2 years ago. We had to find an otolaryngologist, which is an ear, nose, and throat cancer doc. I have never, this might surprise you, but I've never in my life thought about how I should find an otolaryngologist before, or a cancer doctor, or anything. How do you find somebody like that, right? I called up A very good friend of ours, an old neighbor who's a doctor, and asked them for a referral, and they recommended a guy named Dr. Eptikinidis, Dr. E. And at that point, Dr. E was the only person we wanted to see because our friend recommended him and because we like our friend. And now, here's the other part of the story that I didn't mention. Our friend is an addiction psychologist or psychiatrist. He's never had cancer. He doesn't know anybody who's ever been treated by Dr. E. He doesn't work in the same hospital. We never checked Dr. E's references. We never checked his credentials. He had a bunch of letters behind his name. We never looked up what they were. We never looked to see whether he's published any research. This is quite literally like the person who manages all of the money for my family and the person who quite literally treated my wife for cancer. That was a like that like no, it doesn't matter. What matters is how good of a job that you do helping people become, the version of themselves that they want to become, and how much you're able to generate referrals ongoing and positive word of mouth and belief and trust in who you are. We're selling the most important thing in the world. Like, nothing that anybody can ever buy matters if your health doesn't work. It comes first. The idea that there is any amount of money that is too expensive, to me, is just laughable. And you're pretty damn educated already. So do you think reading another book is gonna, it might make you better, and you should keep doing that, of course, but I mean, at this point, you're probably in the top 1% of the top 1% of people who work in fitness in terms of your education already.
Appreciate that. Thanks.
So yeah, do it, man. Well, cool. Thank you for that, Alex.
Thank you.
You got it. Hey, John again, and thank you for listening. I hope that gives you some insight into how to kind of think about what roles that people might want to step into, or you might want them to step into when they're coming in to help out with your business. Now, we didn't really get into the specifics of how to hire in that hot seat. It was more about figuring out where to bring somebody in. If you do want to know the specifics of how to hire, I'm going to recommend you check out episode 90 of this podcast. It's literally called How to Hire. It goes into a lot more detail on that. And before you go, this was a recording of a hot seat for my high-end mentorship. If you are interested in the mentorship, if you're looking to scale your online fitness business, please send me a DM on Instagram. I'm at It's Coach Goodman, and just say mentor and we'll have a conversation. Okay, check out episode 90 if you want to learn more about hiring. I'll talk again soon.